Welcome back to Control Alt Lead, the podcast from computing where we talk to IT leaders at the sharp edge of strategy and technology leadership. Normally. This week's a bit different. Penny and I are sitting together to talk about some of the massive news that's happened in tech this week, because there have been some really interesting developments. We're going to start here in the UK with the under 16s social media ban. Now, I have thoughts on this, but Penny, you have teenagers, so perhaps this is one for you to start with.
I do indeed have teenagers. I have several of them, and I have canvassed the views of older teenagers on this one. So I've got a boy who's 18 and a daughter who's 16, and interestingly, they had kind of mixed views on this. They both started from the same place, which is that they agreed that there is a problem and it does need solving. My 18-year-old son just doesn't think it's going to work. Therefore, in his view, it's completely pointless. My daughter's view is more that she worries that the wrong people have essentially been targeted. She's like, it's not fair. They're sort of coming after the teenagers rather than after the tech companies. And she also worries about the idea of a kind of cliff edge at the age of 16, which I think is one of the kind of complaints about it. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Mixed views, but also acknowledging that the government is coming from the right place in trying to do something.
Yeah, and I see their point there entirely. We should be putting the onus on tech companies to sort out a problem that they have created. But does the UK have the geopolitical clout to do so?
No. I mean, will that do as an answer? No, it's abundantly clear that we don't have that clout. I think the point that we're targeting the wrong people, yes, it's true. However, there is such abundant evidence of the harms that are being caused to young people that I have thought about this a great deal, and I have come down on the side of, I think this is the right thing to do, because trying to restrict social media use in children, it's not going to prevent us continuing to pressure the tech companies to get, to clean up the content, to look at some of the features like infinite scroll that we know are so damaging. So, the phrase "don't let perfection be the enemy of the good," I think is very salient here. I think the time has long since passed for tech companies to voluntarily police their own behaviour, their own platforms, their own content. And
you don't think a strongly worded letter from Ofcom would make a difference?
No, funnily enough, many strongly worded letters have completely failed to make any sort of difference so far. So yes, I do think it's the right thing to do. Interestingly, I found a stat this morning which I thought was really interesting, and it kind of rebuts the "well, it just won't work" point, which is that this was in the Times this morning, actually, a piece by Hugo Rifkind, and he said that, so apparently since the age verification functionality was rolled out, it was about a year ago, wasn't it now, to access porn, essentially, people have to prove that they're over 18 years of age. Traffic to Pornhub has dropped 77%.
Now, is that just traffic from the UK? Because I imagine, thanks to VPNs, traffic from elsewhere in the world has increased rather significantly.
Quite possibly. But just the fact that traffic from the UK has dropped to that extent, I think shows that, not that it works perfectly, and obviously not that people just won't access via VPN, but it does show that it has an impact on behaviour. And I think that over time, the legislation and the cultural impact of it will sort of mutually reinforce each other. And over the longer term, I think it will become essentially more successful as time goes on, because it's much easier to persuade children not to start using something and to persuade their parents not to let them use it than it is to persuade people that already use those things to basically stop.
So you think that it's going to be difficult to take it away from this generation, but subsequent generations are going to perhaps have an easier time of it?
Yeah, well, and I think they will benefit, and that is all to the good. So yeah, I mean, nobody has a crystal ball, do they? We'll have to see how it pans out. But yeah, I think it broadly, I think a lot of details still need to be worked on. I still think you should keep the pressure up on tech companies, but I think it is the right thing to do, and I think it will have an impact.
Yeah, because this doesn't have to be the be all and end all. There can
No.
still be pressure on tech companies to change specific assets like infinite scroll or the algorithms that respond positively to conflict because they're just trying to promote engagement. That's where you get things like rage baiting. So there can still be that pressure. This is just like the first step, but it is a big step. It's basically a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
It's not a nut though, is it?
It's
Um,
what would
and
be
so
a better analogy
and the
here?
tools that we have been using to crack that nut have not been working. So
No,
I would,
so the
insanity is
fine
doing the same
files,
thing again and expecting a different result, isn't it? So
yeah, so the fine like toothpicks and files aren't working, so may as well just try the hammer.
let's try the hammer. Yeah, absolutely. Very much in
Yeah.
favour of trying the hammer. And also the other point I wanted to make here, which again I've sort of thought about a lot, it's not just the content, because one of the objections to this, especially from campaigners like Ian Russell, whose point of view goes without saying, I have a huge amount of respect for, is that we need to focus on the content, not the medium. And I completely see the validity of that argument. However, the medium itself, we have seen a lot of the evidence would suggest of the last 10 years suggests that it's the medium itself that's also problematic. You can be watching the most inoffensive content. I mean, my daughter had a thing for these like home organizing videos, and you'd see this sort of speeded up footage of people organizing things into sort of beautifully labeled acrylic containers and that sort of thing. But it's still addictive. And if you're watching that content for 6 hours a day, that's still harmful. The content's completely, benign. But the amount of time you're spending consuming it is harmful in itself. And it's crowding out other activity that's so much more important for the development of young people and their happiness. And they don't always know what's good for them. Obviously, our job as parents is to police digital boundaries to some extent. And yes, of course, they will push against those boundaries. But, if we let children be the judge of what's good for them, then where would we be, Tom?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, mine's only 10 months old, so it's a bit easier for me. His willpower is currently lacking compared to mine, but I'm not going to be there for long, I know. You bring up a really interesting point there about parental responsibility, and I want to move on for the other topic that we want to talk about here, but I do want to bring this one up because the libertarians of Reddit and social media are against this ban, and they all say, "Oh, well, it's down to the parents." But parental responsibility only goes so far when companies are creating deliberately addictive products, like algorithms. Nobody is arguing against a ban on selling cigarettes and alcohol to teenagers. But as you say, no one has a crystal ball and time will tell.
Yeah, I mean that the point about parental responsibility is so true, but it's easier as a parent to say, no, you can't have access to Snapchat at the age of 9 because no, everybody else doesn't have it. And this has always been the problem. Your children will suffer to some extent if they, certainly socially, if they are not on a platform that everyone else really is on. However, if the numbers are, this feeds back into the cultural point I made earlier, that if the numbers are reduced to say 30-40%, it's a lot easier as a parent to to hold the line.
Because then that critical mass isn't there.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about this as much as we can do. Let's move on to the other big news of the week, which is Anthropic. And it's not just one topic about Anthropic, there's quite a lot going on there. The company has registered to have its first IPO, or its IPO, so the AI industry's first IPO. That was last week. And then earlier this week, the US government came out and said, no, you can't sell or you can't allow non-Americans to access your most advanced models, Fable and Mythos. So that's an export ban. And now, because there is no way for Anthropic, quite understandably, to say this person's definitely an American, they've just taken them off the market.
Yeah.
Something of a victim of their own success because their models are too powerful. So, to what extent is this the US government just having it in for Anthropic versus they have a valid concern and these are, these could potentially be digital superweapons?
Digital superweapon has just this kind of Marvel anti-hero sort of vibe to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's it's an interesting sort of topic here because the capabilities of Fable and of Mythos, which again are these models that can hunt down and expose vulnerabilities in a tech stack, those capabilities have already, to a certain extent, been replicated by other models. So OpenAI, their most advanced model, can do pretty much the same thing. And open source models have been shown to replicate the same capabilities as well already. So because that technology...
But sorry, go on.
Go on, Penny.
No, I was gonna say, but isn't Fable essentially Mythos with the slightly more advanced Mythos, but with the cybersecurity capability removed? If you try to basically go down a cybersecurity route with or a biological one as well, I think, with Fable, it basically drops you back down to another model like
Yeah,
Opus
there's
4.8 or something.
Mythos is the most advanced one with all the cyber stuff. Fable is still very advanced, but it has more restrictions on it. But the US
Yeah.
government is not differentiating, and it said
Yeah.
just no to anything outside the UK.
No.
Sorry, the
No.
USA.
But doesn't that undermine the case that it's a principled, concerned stance about it falling into the wrong hands, and perhaps more motivated by the personal enmity that has resulted, that they fell out with Anthropic in, was it February?
Well, I would argue that expecting any sort of principled stance from the Trump White House is a lesson in, failure already.
Yeah, I'm not gonna argue with that.
But I think because these technologies are already out there, these capabilities are already out there on other models, it is starting to look more and more like this is just the Trump White House saying we don't like Anthropic, because of course Anthropic stood up to them in February, as you say, saying we have red lines, we will not allow our technology to be used in autonomous robots and in warfare.
But Anthropic is still embedded quite deeply into, sort of Pentagon control systems, because apparently Anthropic was used in Iran, in Iran during the war that may or may not still be ongoing.
At the time of recording, yeah, we're not sure.
At the time of recording, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, who knows? But I think Anthropic made a lot of hay commercially out of this sort of bust up with Pete Hegseth.
Oh yeah, it definitely did. We saw Claude's market share massively rising and OpenAI's dropping, and that was great ahead of this coming IPO. But now this is going to affect the IPO. This is going to affect the valuation. It's very poor timing for Anthropic, which was probably done on purpose.
Yeah. I would have said so. And yeah, I'm sure that was uppermost in the minds of the people in the Trump administration.
Now, the Trump administration has said effectively that they don't want non-Americans having these capabilities, disregarding the fact they're already out there. This adds a lot more fuel to this tech sovereignty fire that is raging across the world, and especially in Europe at the moment, right? Because we're seeing lots of European companies and countries starting to move away from US tech. Even in the UK, there's a big move to sort of raise AI sovereignty. So this is the fact that the Trump White House can just outright say, no, you can't make these products available outside the USA is a pretty clear security risk.
Yeah, it certainly proves
if they have. Yeah, so can we afford to ignore these obvious signals from the USA that they're willing and able to shut down the world's access to increasingly critical systems?
I would say it would be very unwise to ignore those signals But I think it's also unrealistic to suddenly be able to expect to deliver the kind of entire, the AI ecosystem of our dreams is not. It is not possible to develop that in Europe and the UK at the moment with the tools that we currently have available.
Even you think, even if all various countries in Europe work together to be, we built the Eurofighter, for example, in a similar fashion. Do you think collaboration across Europe, we couldn't match the USA or Chinese AI ecosystem?
Not quickly. I think collaboration is always positive, of course it is. And I think progress can be made. But the problem we have in Europe is that we don't control. Currently we have the EU hosts something like 5% of global data center capacity, and America has like 80%. And this is it. And this is what takes us back to the question of infrastructure. I was at London Tech Week all of last week, and there were so many discussions about sovereignty, and the government used it as a platform to make lots of announcements. And all of the announcements, I think quite sensibly, focused on the AI infrastructure and the AI hardware plan. What we are very good at in this country is, we have the expertise for, the chip development, for example, but we keep losing it to America. And what the government is trying to do via a series of kind of different investments and public procurement and all the rest of it is encourage that expertise to stay here and try and essentially build leverage where we have leverage, which could be infrastructure. That's where if you can control that part of the AI stack, you can build us global leverage. But that's going to require making some very hard policy choices in the UK and in the EU, because it needs data centers. It always comes back to data centers. It's so boring, really, but it's just a fact of life. And data centers are about as popular as Keir Starmer at the moment.
Yeah, nobody wants a data center on their doorstep, and that's the difficult part, isn't it?
And politicians like to be seen to be campaigning against them as well, because they do have serious environmental consequences, and they are noisy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they do consume a huge amount of power, and the grid connections are really difficult. And there are so many practical considerations. So yes, I think focusing on the hardware component of the AI stack is a good idea. But I'm not entirely sure that politicians and policymakers at senior levels have really got their head around what they're going to have to do to make it happen.
A depressing thought, but at least there is some glimmering of a plan in controlling the bottlenecks and the things that we can control.
And I don't think it's depressing. I just think it's something that we're going to have to work through. And I think it will. I think people will get their heads around it. I think it will become, things like the US just pulling access to Anthropic's best models will focus minds perhaps in a way that hasn't happened before.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Okay, the last thing that we want to talk on, which is a very short amount of discussion because I think you and I are pretty aligned on this one, is the SpaceX IPO.
It's insane.
So Anthropic, which is not revenue generating, but it produces, this very widely used AI product. For its IPO, it's been listed at an initial valuation of 20 times revenue.
Yeah.
SpaceX has been listed at an initial valuation of more than 60 times revenue. Now, Google has never exceeded 25 times revenue. Any of the older tech giants have never exceeded that point. 60 times revenue is bonkers. And it has set a price, like SpaceX has set its price for shares and didn't allow it to go up or down with demand, which is also very unusual.
Well, it's also now it's embedded in lots of Americans' 401ks as well, isn't it? Wasn't there? I'm not quite sure of the ins and outs of it. I'm not a finance journalist, but there was they basically changed the system because once it hits a certain value, it then automatically goes into the indexes that make up people's pensions, basically, which is quite worrying.
It is. It could be, yeah. I mean, if if SpaceX now craters, then there's going to be potentially a lot of very unhappy shareholders out there. And let's not forget that these shareholders, even the ones who buy SpaceX directly, they don't own it through a pension fund, they don't have any say in how SpaceX is run, because again, that was a really unusual step, but Elon Musk has retained all control. He isn't allowing his shareholders to have any sort of say over the running of his company. So what we've seen here is institutional investors who were allowed to invest before the IPO to help get SpaceX up and running. They bought at something like $4 a share early on. Now it has been forced to be traded at $135 a share, which basically means cash in their hands. Like, institutional investors now are making bank off of retail investors. And, don't get me wrong, SpaceX has a product. It has a good product. It is actually doing stuff in the physical world that is really, really interesting. But 60 times value is, it's a lot.
I think SpaceX is obviously, like, from an engineering perspective, it's a really interesting company, but the valuation is not grounded in any kind of business fundamental, on planet Earth, as it were. And then yes, I think you're right. I think it's retail investors that will lose out. And there is a long history of obviously crazy prices at IPO, and then it kind of floats back down to earth in the medium and longer term. So, would it make a good investment long term? Probably not. I mean, how much money did SpaceX lose last year? I don't. I mean, it's literally burning through like billions and billions of dollars every year. But in a sane world, that would have been reflected in its valuation. But obviously, we don't. When it comes to anything to do with Elon Musk, technology, AI, we don't live in a sane world.
No, we've moved increasingly far away from shareholders or potential shareholders actually holding companies to account. And now we buy based on hypes and vibes.
Yeah, hypes and vibes. Yeah, I think that literally sums up the entire AI infrastructure, AI investment bubble, doesn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Right. That's all the time we have for this week. Thank you to the audience for joining us. This has been our first sort of attempt at a news roundup. So please do let us know what you think of the format. We'd love to hear from you. As ever, head over to computing.co.uk for more IT research, news and analysis. And stay tuned to Control Alt Lead. We have many more fantastic guests coming up to see you through the summer. See you soon.
Cheerio.